We're 5 minutes in, and we don't have very long. We'll get started and then allow people to come in if they want to. Thank you all for coming to this conversation about television. This is what I hope. This is going to prove that I'm a lawyer doing this. I want to do three things. I want to talk a little bit about how we all got from here, or from law school, to where we are. Maybe talk a little bit about the life of a writer, and then talk a little bit about television, the way television has been changing, why it's changed, what the implications are societally for the change in television, what the business reasons are for those things. We can also talk about anything you want to talk about. So I'd love to have this where if there's something that's going on in the middle and you want to ask a question in the middle and interrupt us. And we'll do it that way, and we'll have a conversation amongst ourselves. A very quick introduction. Alfredo Barrios and I, well, we work together on the Writers Guild. And Alfredo, name your three credits you want to
Burn Notice is probably the most well-known show I've done.
Alfredo, you're not keeping the people in the room.
Oh, no, sorry. They hated Burn Notice. Worked for Law & Order. You've probably heard of that one. And most recently, I'm working on a show called Six about Navy SEALs on the History Channel. We're going into our second season. So that's keeping me busy these days in Vancouver.
Jordan?
Hi, everyone. I currently write for NCIS Los Angeles, and then I was on two legal shows before that you will win a prize if you've heard of them. One is called The Whole Truth. It was on ABC, and one is called The Defenders, which is on CBS.
By the way, can you hear us? Can everyone hear us? Yeah. Okay, and the taping is fine. My name is Peter Blake. I wrote for House for 8 years. I've written for a bunch of other shows, the most interesting of which is a show that hasn't aired, might never air, but I got to write in a writer's room in Rome for 2 weeks, which was really fun.
Jeffrey?
I wrote and produced Hill Street Blues for all but 1 year of its run. Wow. And hardly done TV since then.
Hi, I'm Desta. I'm brand new to this. I just transitioned into TV writing, and I just finished my first season on The Last Tycoon.
So we range from people who've left the law school only a couple of years ago to people who left the law school decades ago. From Hill Street Blues, which to my mind is the most important television drama in history, probably up until The Sopranos, which came and now rivals that. So we can talk about all of those things. The first question I have for everybody is, what did your parents say when you said you went to law school but you wanted to be a writer? So how did
It was not the answer I expected. My mom said, "Can I be your date to the Oscars?" And she didn't say that sarcastically either. I think she was as unaware about how hard this was going.
It's the Emmys, Mom.
I know.
Come on, Mom.
I didn't have the heart to correct her. She didn't have any clue as to how difficult this was supposed to be, and frankly, neither did I. And part of that ignorance was bliss for me, in that I just jumped into it head first, and the lack of fear really came in handy. Thankfully it worked out, so they didn't have to worry too much about me.
anyone else have a different experience? Parents who were?
My parents had a completely fear-based response, and they were horrified and just so scared for me that I would not be able to put food on the table. And I just ignored them as much as I could, and it all worked out. So I have really been able to flaunt it. And now my dad wears an NCIS baseball cap wherever he goes. He is so proud.
My experience, actually, my dad was himself a TV producer, and so he took a more savvy approach. He said something like, well, you might want to go to law school because you might not be able to make a living as a writer immediately. Or you could always get a job in business affairs, which is the business arm of the entertainment companies. And with that, he was satisfied.
After law school, I worked as a management consultant, and I was just terrible, just completely incompetent at it, and just absolutely miserable. So my parents just knew how unhappy I was. So I told them I wanted to move to LA and start writing, and they said that they would support me. which I assumed meant financially. So I moved to LA, and I got there and found out it didn't mean financially, but luckily that was actually the push that got me to LA. And my dad actually hated being a lawyer by the end, so he was fine as soon as I started working.
Did you come to law school thinking you wanted to be a lawyer and then transition into the idea that maybe I wanted to do the arts, or did you come here knowing you were never going to be a lawyer and perhaps were you using this as an insurance policy?
I mean, I did not come to law school thinking I would be a lawyer. I came here entirely thinking this would be an insurance policy. I was like, I'll go, it's a good backup plan, you get into Harvard Law School, why not? Like, but I knew I wasn't going to practice, and I knew I wasn't going to pursue law. And I think back to your previous question, I think my parents thought, like, I'm from a small town in Iowa, like 400 people, and I have an immigrant father, and they thought, like, you're in law school, like, that's the thing. So, like, when I told them I was transitioning, they were just completely confused. But they also knew that this was, like, being a lawyer was never what I was going to be.
Is that true for other people? Did you think?
I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I was a lawyer, actually, for 5 years at a big firm downtown Los Angeles called Melvin and Myers.
I was there.
And Peter was there. I think we were summers together.
My
And
wife was there?
Yeah, and a lot of them Albany people. And writing came later for me. Actually, it was something that just kind of popped up unexpectedly.
Because you were tired of the law, or it was just a thing that you found out you loved while you were doing it and said, this is what I want to do?
You know, a friend of mine asked me to read a screenplay. That's how it started. While I was working in law, and I was so kind of captured by it, and it just sparked this idea that maybe I could do this, which was that ignorant thing again. But it worked.
We also have a strangely successful class. There are
Yeah.
2 other TV writers who are more successful than you and I are.
Who else is in your
There was a guy named Ted Cohen who got a job right out of law school. He had written a spec Simpson script, and he got on a TV show. So out of law school, he went straight to Hollywood and started working. But then he worked on Friends. He was one of the top writers on Friends, and now he's on Veep. And then there's another guy named John Goldstein, who has since gone on to, he wrote the last Spider-Man movie, and he's also a director. So really, 4 guys in our class are TV writers.
I think I had no intention to be here.
Oh, sorry, yeah. We'll do it.
Which
You
one?
wanted us to speak up.
Okay, sorry. Yes, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I had no.
Lean in.
I didn't think I was going to be a lawyer, except in some wildly romantic version of, I was going to be in Paris and jet around. But I think I was the class of '70 at Harvard Law School, and I don't know. I mean, there might be competition for the highest percentage of people who weren't going to be lawyers in the law school class, but we would have been right up there. And part of it had to do with the draft.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, so let's talk for a sec about what it means to be a lawyer and then become a writer. For example, we've all done writing staffs. Is there something different about the way you approach writing because you came from law school? In other words, what did law school teach you about writing that you might not have known had you not come here? Was it worth going here? Is there something? Are you a different writer having come to Harvard Law School?
100%. I think there's 2 facets. I think one is the discipline that you kind of come out of here with. You really have to be a self-starter to go into this business. You have to generate your own schedule. You have to stay on top of things. But I think the other thing that, and you could probably speak to this, Chris, and certainly people that have run shows, is the power to persuade people to do things, which we hone here, is a really, really powerful tool to have in Hollywood. Because you have to persuade executives to buy your show. You have to persuade directors to shoot scenes in a certain way. You have to persuade actors to say lines in a certain way. The power to use argument and the power to persuade is an incredibly powerful tool, and I think that's the thing that sets us apart often.
You guys agree? I think that's actually right. I mean, I always think of myself as making an emotional argument and organizing a script or a series or season around the idea that you need to. You are making an argument that needs to be voted for in a sense emotionally. It's just not a practical argument.
But isn't that sort of what we all did when we were, if you majored in English or history, you wrote essays, which made an argument. So I personally, partially because I did well in college, then less well in law school, and I was terrible as a management consultant. I just felt that I didn't learn anything while I was here that was useful. But the first job, I mean, seriously, it's just a big waste of 3 years. But the first job I got was on a legal TV show, so I take that back as soon as I said it.
How many people started on a show that was a law show?
Halfway.
Halfway, yeah. You're the only one who, so.
I mean, in point of fact, I never would have gotten on Hill Street if I hadn't spent 2.5 years in the DA's office in Manhattan.
Right.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have been in the DA's office in Manhattan except that I had set out to be a writer and was totally broke and really needed a job. And the fastest place I could find a job, having graduated from Harvard Law School and being willing to work for $14,500 a year, was in the New York DA's office in 1974.
Right. I think that's it. So this is really good. My first 4 jobs were on legal shows. I moved away from that entirely since, but it got me in the door because I could, like our showrunner said, so somebody's got to hand somebody a subpoena. What are the technical words you would use? And I said, here. And so that kind of stuff is how I got ahead. Yeah, what were you going to say, Peter? Do people agree that law school itself did not have a fundamental impact on the way they, apart from Alfredo's argument, did it matter to you that you went to law school?
It definitely got me my first job and then my second job, but I actually was a journalist before I became a TV writer, and I usually skip over the law school part of my story because I knew I loved to write, and when I was in law school, actually, I freelanced the entire time I was at school, and then the journalism industry started to implode, and I thought maybe there's a different type of writing out there for me, and I was in Los Angeles. I went to Harvard undergrad, but I went to UCLA for law school, so I was already in Los Angeles, and I understood that this was another option and a different way that I could continue writing and maybe even have more fun doing it. So a lot of my background in meeting deadlines and everything, I actually pull from my journalism experience much more so than from law school. But
What kind of journalist were you?
I was in New York for a little bit. I wrote for the Periscope section of Newsweek, which is at the front of the magazine. And then I went to law school at UCLA, and literally the first week into school, I contacted my editor at Newsweek, and I said, I am available for freelancing. This is not what I am supposed to be doing with my life. And I wrote, I ended up getting a job writing for a column for the New York Times called Bold-Faced Names that had this very snarky voice, which is not my voice, and it was my first time writing for a character. And it was so much fun. I did my law school classes in the morning, and then I went out and I covered stories in the afternoon and the evening, and I loved it. And then I realized that I could always write for characters. And
Did you do that from LA?
I did that in LA. The column
Times?
ran, so whenever there was something going on in Los Angeles, I got to do that part of it. And it was so much fun. It is what got me through law school. It mentally got me through law school. And then I wrote a script.
Yes, you went off for a second because you were in law school and you were very involved in the idea of telling stories
Yes.
here. You want to talk a little bit about that journey? And then we'll get in past our own personal stuff and maybe talk a little bit more about the technical stuff, what it means to be a writer in television, how television works.
The journey into transitioning into writing? Or?
Yeah, I mean, to talk a little bit about what you did in law school, because of the documentaries and how
I
that
mean, I
actually
think I was very involved. I had sort of wrote and dabbled in independent film before I went to law school, and then I think when I went to law school, I was just like, that is to the side. I'm going to be doing law stuff. But it was just, again, like I think speaking to the point of how law helps you in writing, I mean, it's all persuasive communication, and I just saw narrative as the easiest way to translate advocacy. So, I mean, I just did a bunch of things. I helped start a student documentary group that still exists, and we were helping students tell stories and specifically pairing them with how to tell advocacy stories. You know, I kept writing. I mean, I even submitted for like a J-term project. I did a screenplay. Like, that was something that I was able to do. I helped, we like organized a Sundance trip for students to go. I just kept sort of in that world, and I kept seeing opportunities more and more for it while I was at Harvard Law School, and then transitioned into it.
Right, well, you were here, the law school itself began to acknowledge the idea that telling stories was a necessary
Yeah, it
was a
tool
necessary thing,
for
yeah.
lawyers, as opposed to for us saying, hey, we want to get away from the law and tell stories
Well,
separately from that.
yeah, again, when you're talking about persuasion, the easiest way to do that is through narrative. It is through stories. And I think when I was here, like professors in the administration were sort of coming around that this is a real tool that we can use, and we should encourage students to harness it and develop skills around that.
Right.
So I was really privileged anyways.
I have a question for all of you. How many people here have some sense of what it's like, what the life of a writer on a television show is? I mean, is that something that's a mystery to you, or do you know it? How many people here don't really know very much what a writer in television does, how television works?
Great.
Okay, good. You want to talk a little bit about, hey, Jeffrey, so why don't you maybe start?
Do you write for one character? I'm kidding. That's the question every
Really?
TV
You-
writer
yeah,
gets.
we each get-
I get that so much. Do you really write for one character? And it's like, well, that would be a very strange script that only every one person talking.
Right.
And in fact, it's such a common question that they spoofed it on The Sopranos. The mobsters asked that to the Hollywood guy.
Yeah. Although there is a lot of difference in the way, I mean, Shonda Rhimes' shows get written a lot differently from the way
Yeah.
other people's shows do. So Jeffrey, why don't you talk for a little bit, Jeffrey, about what it's like to be on a staff going back to when Hill Street Blues was going on, and maybe even talk a little bit about why Hill Street Blues, for those who don't know, was a revolutionary show in the history of, by the way, we're all dramatic television writers, so there's a lot of remarkable stuff that's going on in comedy over the last bunch of decades, but we are all examples of the history of television drama. And it's, in some ways, although it doesn't start with, it made it was a sea change in Hill Street Blues that fundamentally shifted the history of television.
I think that's true, and yet I wasn't entirely aware of it at the time because I hadn't watched any television before doing it, or at least since I was in high school, I mean, there was that long gap of doing anything but sitting home watching TV.
Right.
And many of the things that made Hill Street revolutionary at the moment, even in its production as well as in the results, are now commonplace. But we formerly and still network broadcast television, that is to say the 3 or 4 big networks that throw this stuff out for free with ads, required you to do 22 or more episodes a season, which was a huge writing burden for a show that was intricately written, that used up stories like crazy, that had a joke a minute pretty much. And so 4 or 5 people had to work together pretty much all the time just to keep up with the schedule, because the schedules were also, I think, slightly stingier than they are now. They were more generous than they had been, but the idea was to shoot an episode in 8 working days, and that doesn't include weekends, but 8 working days, basically. They started saying 7, became 8. And if you multiply that by 22 and you think of a whole year, and you think of just having a little bit of time free between seasons, you can imagine how the season goes along. And
So we do. I'm the only network TV writer up here, I think. Currently.
Yeah.
Okay. I write for an action show, so we do stunts. We blow up cars and whatever we do. And we do 7-day episodes, and we do 26 episodes.
7 days?
7-day action.
Let me back up for a second so get people up to date. So the way television used to work before Hill Street Blues was it was mostly single character leads. So shows like Mannix or Magnum or whatever. It was some very good shows, Columbo even, although that was not that had fewer. It was single character, often written by freelancers because the episodes were more or less standalone. There were no ongoing life stories, more or less. They were based on the plot of a given episode. Hill Street Blues transformed television because while there were episodic plots that began and concluded in the same episode, lives extended and sometimes plot extended episode to episode. And what ended up happening because of that is what Jeffrey said. It became necessary to have staffs who were there all the time writing television together so that there would be continuity. And it meant that all of a sudden writers were in charge of television in a way that they had not necessarily been before. It was the rise of writer-producers, people like Stephen Boshko or Stephen Cannell. Those people came out of this new era in television. We all grow out of that, so that almost all of our time is now spent together in a large room with a bunch of other writers taking pieces and writing them episodes, not characters, but connected to each other's lives over the course of a year so that what you watch actually makes sense from week to week.
yeah. What we would do is hire some freelancers at the beginning of the season when things were slack. But they were mostly trials, just to see who could possibly contribute more. And then whatever the freelancers did virtually, unless they became staff members, were totally rewritten by the staff. And basically 4 people in any one season wrote the 22 hours, although I would say that it's easier to rewrite other people's work that you think is trash than actually writing something original yourself.
True, yeah.
The anger alone propels you, and also the need to feel superior.
Alfredo, you just ran a show, and I always think that the job of doing that is as close to being a lawyer as anything. Can you just give us a list of everything you need to do in a week?
Yeah.
I mean, like what the range of stuff, what it means to do television nowadays.
Well, as a showrunner, as somebody who's actually trying to run the show, we've all been there probably at different points. The actual writing is a very small percentage of your time. That percentage is made up of, as Jeffrey described, sitting in a room with probably anywhere from 7 to 10 writers, trying to break outlines and storylines for the entire season, right? Because as Chris just described, now we're living in a serialized world where stories will cross episodes and will play from beginning to end. So you have to kind of keep track of that. And my job is to try to kind of manage all of that story development. And as we develop through the season, we assign scripts and episodes to certain writers, and then they take point on getting those episodes written. The rest of the time is really managing the production of the show. And if you shoot on location, as I do, then that means a lot of trips to wherever we're shooting. For Burn Notice, I was in Miami. For 6, it's in Vancouver. And that really is largely a managerial function of trying to manage anywhere between $30 to $50 million worth of budget on a show, and that includes crew, producers, managing directors, and a good part of my job, in addition to those 2 major components, is sitting in an editing room, making sure that the end product that we have is what we set out to do. And those are kind of the 3 major elements of my day and my year.
Most of us, you tell me whether this is right or wrong, most of us got into television, that's at a point when television was the poor stepchild of film, but we did it in large part because the life of a writer in television was so exciting and different. Nowadays, everyone wants to do TV, so great feature directors and writers are all doing that because it provides some flexibility. But back when we were doing it, I don't know about you, I went into television because it allowed me to do a lot of different things in a week. Was that your experience also, Jeffrey? Or did you, that doesn't mean I took my first job that way. I took my first job because it was the one that was available.
Yeah, well, I was going to say Hill Street. I went on Hill Street because it was on offer. I could. It's not that easy to break into this world, and when you get a chance, I think you kind of do it, whether it's wherever it is. And after that, the lure of writing theatrical feature films as opposed to TV, for me, was chiefly I wouldn't have to work so hard. Really committing to one of those shows, at least then, and it sounds like even now, if it's a broadcast network show, as opposed to HBO or Amazon, where you might have a short season, it's really arduous. It's actually tougher than going to law school, I think, if that's possible.
That's true, but there's one difference that makes TV more appealing to a certain personality type, which is that it's collaborative. So it's funny. I came in right. So you started at the. You actually started in a way the second golden age of TV, right? That's what it's called, with Hill Street Blues. And I came in right at the third because my spec script that I wrote, the fake sample script I wrote, was a Sopranos script after the first season. So I came in right then. But sorry, now I'm spacing out. I was talking about.
Talking about why television was so particularly.
Oh
exciting.
yeah, no. So it's just that at that point I was like, movies definitely seemed cooler. I wanted to be Quentin Tarantino, and movies were just as economically viable back then. They're much less so as a career. But when it came down to it, it was a choice between sitting down and writing, a movie spec script alone on some completely original thing, or writing, a fake Sopranos and then working with a team going forward. And I just am a more I like being surrounded by people. I'm a more social person. So it's in part a personality type decision.
There's also the
Thank you for saying that.
TV is, I mean, TV was and is a writer's medium more than a theatrical.
But was it until Hill Street Blues? I don't think it really.
Even then, yeah, I mean, you had to be a clever guy like Steve Cannell to turn out those plots for Rockford and stuff. I mean, that was not considered a golden age of TV, but it was still tough to do, and it was a small screen. So, whatever virtues you might have had coming from, a great cinematographer or a great director were largely lost.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
And there were a lot of close-ups.
I just wanted to add to your point, because I'm TV is amazing right now, and that's I'm so happy to be entering into it now. But I think when I was deciding, I had written sort of on my own features before going to law school, and deciding this is a career I wanted to pursue and re-entering. I think that was actually one of the deciding points is the collaborative space felt so much to me like law school, and what I really enjoyed about law school is working with peers. Your goal is to create the best story the same way your goal is to create the best argument, and having sort of different and diverse, smart voices are going to lead you. People look at things at different perspectives, and you're collaboratively working towards this goal. And that's been my experience of writing, and part of what made it so attractive, because it felt like a way to kind of replicate what I had really loved about law school in a realm that I also really loved, which was not the law for me. But.
You have a problem with that going from, or was that part of the appeal from going from journalism?
For
to
sure.
around
I mean,
people?
I think I was used to working with a staff, and that was what was very comfortable for me. And it is, I wrote spec scripts on my own in the dark to get my first job, and that was so lonely. I mean, it was,
right.
and I mean, I actually love getting notes, and I think that's also a little bit of the journalism in me. I'm very used to being edited, and it always makes the product better to get someone else's perspective on it, and that's what you get in a writing staff. Hopefully, everyone's collaborating and just getting to a better product at the end of the day.
We're going to ask get some questions in a minute, but maybe we should I know there's a big jump. What's it like for women now in television? What's it like on staffs and getting jobs, being there?
So I write for an action show. I was the only woman on staff for my first 5 years on the show, and 2 years someone was promoted, and now there are two of us. But it is I write for a very macho show. I am not the most macho of women, and I definitely have run into problems of me thinking that I could write for a show for a Navy SEAL, for example. And that comes a lot from the actors and even the people on crew, but you just rise to the occasion, and that's been my unique experience on my show. But I've been there for long enough that now that is all behind it, and you just have to weather that, and I've won everyone over, and so now it's fine. And I think that was hard, and but I think, we just went through the writer's strike negotiation. For the first time, maternity leave was acknowledged as something that female writers or male writers for paternity leave is something that they could have. I feel in many ways it is still a very backwards industry when it comes to women. And that's something that you just have to be really strong about and just power through it.
I'm very new to this, and I had the benefit of being on Chris's staff, which all of us writers, there were 5 out of the 6 of us who were the showrunners were women, so that was really amazing, including someone who had a baby while we were on the staff, Katie. So I don't have a great perspective on that. I think coming into it, it's not something. I think I'm more honestly more cognizant of being a person of color than
that's fine,
being,
right.
Yeah, being a woman. I think that for me is what sticks out as being a person of color writer. Because I was familiar with the fact that Hollywood was very white. I think that is well known. I was not familiar with how white it is.
Well, you and I had an experience on the show. and it's not about being a writer, that just pointed out to me how intentional you have to be at every moment about this. I mean, we were always intentional about hiring staffs that were 50-50 men and women, and directors 50-50, but we had a character who was of mixed race, and we're very close to casting a white actress in that, and you insisted that we think about that. It's very hard. I mean, you guys know, and when I say guys and women, that there are 1,000 decisions to make every day on a television show, and to be making television shows and simultaneously being aware of the fact that you have responsibility to have those shows reflect the way the world looks, and to be, all that. It's not easy to do. I mean, it's not an excuse, but it becomes, you have to really be intentional to get that right.
Yeah, and I think that, and to the point of, my experience so far in, the industry, I mean, none of it is, it's not racist, it's not intentional, there's not a lot of people of color, it's just, again, it's just, trying to make your voice heard, and things like that. It's, that's why having diversity and having those voices are important, to be someone you guys probably just haven't thought about this, but you should think about that, and being able to keep your voice.
Right. What do people want to know about, so we can, just any questions about any of this stuff? Anyone have anything they want to throw out? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, you talked about how your degree here has helped you. Have you ever had to explain it away? Has anyone ever looked at your resume and been like, what the hell? Why are you?
I didn't start off as a writer. I started off as an assistant. After management consulting, I was an assistant in Hollywood, and the only two people who hired me went to Harvard Law School. Just because you don't, when you want an assistant, you just want someone will get your lunch for you and stuff like that. So it makes sense to not hire people who have advanced degrees. But as a writer, it's less.
Anyone else have an issue with that? Anyone have to say?
It's always an advantage, I think. I mean, people are kind of impressed by that.
I'm new to this, and I'm starting interviewing other shows. I don't have to explain it away, but some people are I've had to explain it. They're like, oh, so what is this? Why are you doing this here? Or I think what was really interesting for me is, so after law school, I did a social justice fellowship in Mississippi, and people would look and be like, why are you doing this? Why aren't you going and doing that thing? You should do that thing, not this. So it's not an explain it away, but oftentimes explain it.
The one time it might have been a liability for me, it goes not to TV, goes to writing in general. I was long suffering as a writer. I was living in San Francisco. Because I had been a writer, I could type fast, and I took a job as a legal temp in a big downtown San Francisco law firm. I think it was Morrison and Forster. I don't know if they still exist or not. In any event, I would be in the typing pool, and they'd send me out to somebody, some partner or something, and I'd be typing up this stuff. And at one point, I guess I had a friend from third grade who was a partner in the firm, and they found out that I'd gone to Harvard Law School, and they thought I might have been a spy. I went back to the typing pool and was soon gone.
Other questions? Yeah.
So some of you had experience with journalism or with TV before you went to law school, but I'm wondering what advice you have for someone who has no experience in the field but might be interested in pursuing that even right out of law school.
You're a law student.
I am.
Well, I'm gonna let other people answer because I'm the moderator, but I just want to say I never wrote a word until my third year of law school. It never occurred to me to write, and I didn't get a script written until after I was out of law school, so it's absolutely doable. You want to talk about advice?
My, it's funny, I graduated from here in 1995, and my third year paper was a spec episode of Law and Order, which I persuaded James Warrenberg, who was this great professor, to let me do that. So I was actually able to use it to write my first spec script. But, I mean, don't worry about it in law school. Just, you get out, and what would actually help more than going to law school would be to get some real life experience. If you could work as a DA or something for a couple of years, that would give you really useful experience for cop shows and legal shows, which both still exist to some extent. And then, I mean, just very briefly, if you go online, you can find out basically how to get an agent. I mean, the only real way to get, I'll do this very quickly because it's so technical and boring, but basically you need to get an agent. You got to write a couple of, at least one spec pilot for a drama or a comedy, And the two basic ways of doing it are you just move out to Hollywood, you make friends, and you get them to give it to their agents, and you get signed by an agency, or you can apply to some sort of writing fellowships like Disney has one and other things. You could also possibly get a job as an assistant in a writer's room, but those are very hard to get. And those are the three main ways that I know of to get into it.
Any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write a word till after 5 years in practice, but I would say just from like a less kind of pragmatic approach is just immerse yourself in the kinds of materials that you would like to write. In other words, if you like comedy, immerse yourself in every kind of comedy. If you like drama, immerse yourself in every kind of drama. If there's subsets of drama that you like, immerse yourself in that. Read every script you can get your hands on, truly. Read plays. Start to take a class on screenwriting. And the most important thing of all, write. We all have stories about people who want to be aspiring writers, but they never write at all, zero. And I can't stress that enough. If you want to be a writer, you need to write all the time, and give yourself permission to write really badly. Like that's really important. The problem that I see with a lot of people is that they set the bar really, really high. And it's a scary thing to try to reach this bar, right? When you haven't written a word, you have to give yourself permission to fail often. And then you'll start to find yourself. You'll start to find your own voice. And then you'll start to come out as a writer. But that takes practice.
I would just add one thing. If you think of an episode of television or a movie that you absolutely love, that is a script that you should read first because it looks so different on the page. And you, if you love this movie, you know exactly how the scene plays out on screen, but to see how the writer was able to convey that vision through words is pretty cool. And that's the goal.
The piece of advice I give to people, because I think Alfredo's right, he's right. You got to keep writing and keep writing and keep writing. No matter how good you are and how much you write, it's going to take a long time. It took me 4 years after I got an agent to get paid for the first time. Whoa. So I always say to people, the people who make it are the people who can stick with it. And the people who can stick with it are the people who can put together a life that they can stand living while they're writing. Yeah. So find some way to have a life that you can imagine is going to take you a bunch of years while you're doing this to try to work it through. Because if you can last, you can succeed. I mean, you're almost certainly as smart as and as talented as many people who are in the television business. But the people who fail are the people who give up.
I can't stress that enough also. I mean, persistence is actually the #1 quality you need in Hollywood, honestly. Like, talent will get you there a certain way there, but persistence will be the thing that gets you all the way there.
Also, if you're in this room right now, you're probably pretty smart.
This is an excellent panel, so you've chosen well.
You're just talking about the panel, right?
Yeah. Really, my experience of going, now this was a while ago, but there's an awful lot of television produced still, and a lot of it isn't that smart. And you have a big advantage going in, really, whether you want to acknowledge it to yourself or not. And add a little life experience, do what he says, and write, and you've got a decent chance. And I don't think you can expect more than that.
Can I, because I'm someone who was relatively recently a student, I think there is resources you can leverage while you're here. Like one of the things that I really did was, because I knew this is what I wanted to do, and in law school I was like, the law is not, like, if you can start being involved in those kinds of things here and start them here, people will start knowing you that way. It's almost like branding yourself. Like while I was at law school, I was like the film writer person. Like I helped start this like documentary studio. Like that actually ultimately led to my fellowship. I mean, that's how I met Chris. Like I think that trying to find those opportunities here, and I started off the bat, like for the Opia auction, like they wanted to do promos. I was like, I'll write and direct those. Like, so that was like the first semester I'm doing these video projects, and that led to another thing. I think that there are opportunities here, and the wonderful thing about Harvard is if there are not opportunities, you can make them for yourself. You have a Harvard Law School writers group, and you connect to alumni, and you just have to kind of be aggressive in making your own path. And I also would say to, again, this is just while you're in law school advice, is to take risks. It's very hard. People who go to law school are success-driven and risk-averse. So it's very hard to do this thing that's like, I mean, trust me, like when I told my wife, like after law school, I was like, I really want to be a writer. And she's like, okay, person who just graduated law school, has a shit ton of student debt, a baby and a baby on the way, I think this is a good idea and I'm going to support it. And she did. My parents were confused, but she supported me. I think you have to be okay with taking risks. Like this is like a very small, like micro Harvard example, but like after my first year, I had gotten into HLab and I was like going to go do HLab, which is
Sorry, what's that?
the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau. It's like one of like, you have like the BSA of the Board of Student Advisors, you have the law reviewer, you have the Legal Aid Bureau. And I was like, I'm going to do this because I got in. And my wife, again, voice of reason, was like, why would you do that? Like you can practice pro bono after you graduate. This is going to take up all your time. And it's not what you're passionate about. What you're passionate about is doing like writing and doing film. And I was like, you're right. I was the only person that year who turned it down. Instead, I got more involved with the doc studio. And that is like ultimately how I ended up meeting Chris, who I think when I met you, I was like 8.5 months pregnant. I was really pregnant. Like, it's how I met Chris. It's how I got, like, through the doc studio is how I got my fellowship, where I went to Mississippi and had all these rich life experiences. So you gotta have to, like, I think it's especially hard for law students, especially hard for Harvard law students to kind of, like, stay the course and know you're doing this other thing. But, like, as much as you can do that, it's really good. And also, like, life experience. Like, I'm very new to this, and all they want is people who have life experience. Like, they take, like, me being in Mississippi and doing this fellowship, me like being at law school, because like a lot of the people I'm competing against are like just out of like UCLA screenwriting programs, and they don't have a lot of life experience, and I do.
That's really true because we sit in a room, you guys can speak to this as well, we sit in a room and really just tap into each other's experiences. Everyone can write. The question is who in that room can tell you something, tell you a story that you can take metaphorically and transform into something else. So life experience helps a lot.
I want to talk about risk, which I think is really important, if I can.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's take a chance on that.
Because I think actually that's really important. I'd like to say that the most successful writing pieces I've ever done are the pieces that my friends, my agent, I think my wife, my fellow writers told me not to write. Because it wasn't commercial, it wasn't marketable, it wasn't accessible, it wasn't something they'd seen before, and that's exactly the reason to write it. All the pieces that I was told not to write are the pieces that have done so well for me. And I think it goes to what you're talking about, which is really take risks. Because the worst thing that you can do, I think, is to just copy what's out there already. It's really to find your own voice and find the originality in yourself. That's why people want to hire you, because they don't have other people like you. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Television actually changed that way. It used to be that we got our jobs by writing versions of television shows that were already on the air. You write a spec Hill Street Blues in order to get onto the next show, or spec Wonder Years. That's how I got my first job with my writing partner. People don't ask that anymore. Now they ask you to write original work. Even though the job of a television writer is mostly to be able to mimic the voice of the show, the thing that we're looking for first and foremost is some kind of unique point of view. Other questions? No?
Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just wondering, is writing for television changing now that you have such big stars coming into TV? Like, does that make a difference?
I actually think it has made a difference in certain cases. Anyone want to speak to that? I can speak to that. I mean, you're going to see a lot more examples of showrunners being fired.
Yeah, that's
because a network has to choose between the showrunner and the stars when they disagree. So there are many, many examples of that happening, unfortunately, in recent times.
There was a saying that, and this once used to be true, that in the first season, an actor works for you. Yeah. In the second season, an actor works with you. And in the third season, you work for the actor. These days, you work for the actor right off the bat when you have a big star.
By the way, that's the one advantage of having a show with a really big cast.
Yeah.
It really is.
It really is.
Yeah. And an ensemble. You have a single lead. That single lead isn't.
And never name your show after your main character. We were very lucky because Hugh. I worked in house the whole way through. Hugh Laurie was the greatest guy in the world, but if he hadn't been, we would have been screwed because we couldn't do anything.
Yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, it seems to me that Hollywood kind of blew up with the writer's strike, and before that when the Benson rules lifted, and the digital seems like the next big blow up. And I'm wondering, are there still cast breakage problems? I'm not going back to what he said, because now people seem to go into it like, I'm going to use this, I'm already a singing star, but now I'm going to be this kind of star. And it seems like there's a little bit less wrangling with the networks. Is that completely? For
Wrangling
production
about.
companies. So like, if CBS says, look, we're losing, our advertisers want us to have more of this kind of demographic. So stick this person in your show, or stick this star in, as opposed to just regular negotiations. Does that make sense?
More interference
I
from the
don't,
networks?
I don't notice that. I have to be honest with you. Does anyone else notice that? I don't think it's fundamentally different. I mean, one thing, by the way, is we are writing for smaller niche audiences. So in fact, except for you, none of us actually have the obligation to reach the size audience that we once did. And in that way, I think there's less pressure. So
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I enjoyed going from network television to cable. Even though it was smaller scale, smaller budget, smaller pay, but more freedom. You had a lot more creative freedom, and certainly, although that's changing now, because the stakes are getting much higher, right? Because these programs, even though they're smaller order on cable networks, are very, very lucrative, and and still quite expensive. So it used to be once upon a time that you would go to cable because you had more freedom, but now they're paying attention to us a little bit more. So I don't know if you've noticed that, but.
There's a really good article. A journalist named Joseph Adalian, who writes for Vulture and New York Magazine, wrote. It's called something like The Economics of Streaming, and it's about a year old. And he talks a lot about how the streaming services are getting stars and why they're doing that.
I will say that the business is increasingly good for volumes of writers. More writers are being employed by ever before. But the economics for writers and for average directors is getting less and less good. That all the same pressures on labor that are happening in the rest of America are happening in the television business as well. That power is moving to capital away from labor. So it's a bit of an issue. But getting in, for example, is in some ways easier than it used to be because there are so many opportunities. Yeah, other questions? Yes.
One of my favorite lawyers, beside my wife, is the character Jack McCoy on Law and Order. Now, Sam Waterston was not a lawyer, I don't think. But when I see him, he's the kind of lawyer I want to support me.
Yeah.
When he gets his umbrage up, he's like really confident. How did that happen? How does that happen?
I mean, how does somebody portray
like
something that accurately?
Because it's not just he's a good actor. Like, there's a whole legal thing behind it, and
A chunk of it is that he's a good actor.
Yeah, I mean,
A chunk of it is that Sam Waterston is a
Great
very
actor.
persuasive actor in that range. He really is.
yeah, and I think there's.
I mean, there's a lot of bullshit in Law and Order.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I mean, there's always at least one lawyer on.
Yeah.
There was on Law and Order, but I think on most shows there's a little bit of a feedback loop. You create a character, you cast an actor, and then after a few episodes, you start basing the character a little bit on the actor himself, or at least what they can do well. But Sam Waterston is a great character, and he had a very simple job each week, which was to go and prosecute someone. So
I worked with Sam on Law and Order, and Sam is incredibly intelligent and really hard on you. And really hard on you. On the writing, he's actually he could be a lawyer. I mean, he really could be a lawyer. He's incredibly bright. And the scariest thing would be like when Sam would come over with a question, because he knew it was going to be a very, very strong question, and maybe would exploit some hole in your story. But we had a lot of lawyers on that staff, and Sam knew how to use that resource really well, and I think he just paid attention.
One of the skills of any kind of dramatic writer, really, I think, if they have an actor to work with, is to find the strengths of that actor. I mean, that's a talent that you hone in on because it makes your life so much easier. If you could exploit, if Sam Waterston seems composed and reasonable, but thinking all the time, whereas another guy's a hothead. I mean,
yeah,
as a person, as an offstage personality, even.
We're technically out of time, although I don't think anyone's kicking us out of the room. But if other people have other questions, I'm happy to do it. By the way, has anyone here written a book? recently.
Oh, geez, did you?
I just want to, yeah.
Oh, what's
Whoa,
this?
what's this? What is that? My word. I since doing TV, I've written fiction for a number of years, and that's pretty much all I do. And I wrote 4 books that were called the Meritocracy Quartet, the third of which was set in the TV business in the 80s. It's called Theme Song for an Old Show, and Chris was kind enough to remember. If anyone is interested, I'm sure it's on Amazon.
I think there was a question in the middle.
Yeah, are there questions?
In the middle.
You have a question?
With all the television you've created and all the television you've seen, as you reflect back on that body of work by yourselves and others, is there a particular episode of somebody else's show that just rocked or transformed or transfixed you? And where you looked at it afterwards as the TV faded and said, I'm different now for having seen that.
Definitely.
You want to go down the line and do that?
I think the finale of 6 Feet Under.
Oh, that was
I mean, that was. I still get teary-eyed. I mean, what that told me was you can really reach into somebody's heart through television.
I liked that a lot. Did you know that was a Sia song?
Yeah.
I mean, it was so good that they were playing it too. Come back to me. I'm going to think about this. Hold on.
One that pops to mind are a couple of episodes of ER that I absolutely loved. I thought ER was on the air at the same time as The Sopranos, and they did twice as many episodes. And I think at times they were as good as The Sopranos, which is just incredibly hard to do. There was a John Wells episode in which the Noah Wyle character loses a baby that was so wrenching to watch and terrified me during my wife's first pregnancy. I was like, because the Corrigan, I saw it on ER, and then, but even in a more actually practical way, there was I think Jack Orman wrote an episode in which Anthony Edwards' character murders a patient, and I just thought that was like. I just couldn't believe it happened. So I just couldn't believe it, and I based. So I thought I want to write a house episode in which you get to a point where a doctor kills a patient. So I came up with a totally different story, but it was completely inspired by that episode. I think it was a pretty successful episode.
I'm not sure why I'm remembering this right now, but in the late 1970s, I was still living in New York. And I liked the Rockford Files, actually.
Everyone did.
And I was watching an episode that David Chase wrote. And in the episode, a couple detectives from New Jersey had to go out to California to bring a prisoner back. And the whole time they were in California, they were complaining about stuff from New Jersey they couldn't find in California. And I thought it was so charming that I thought, my God, if you can get away with doing that, that might be actually fun to do. And in retrospect, of course, you can see like The Sopranos in miniature in that one scene, in those one sequence of scenes.
So funny.
I would say, the things that come to mind are the end of, not the specific episode, but like the end of season 4 of Orange is the New Black, when they killed the Poussey character. It's just really emotional when they contrast her story versus the officer's story. It just is real. I can't even make it through the whole episode. Have to stream it and kind of fast forward through stuff because it's just very impactful and emotional. And I think the other things recently have really rocked me is probably the first couple of episodes of Handmaid's Tale, specifically in the context of the administration in the world that we're living in, and plus Reed Moreno, who's an amazing. Just the visuals paired with the story. I think watching the first 2 or 3 episodes was just really uncomfortable. I never watch TV and be like, I need to turn this off. And I felt that way watching Handmaid's Tale. The first 2 or 3 episodes, and that to me was really impactful.
Now I have something. So I really enjoyed Downton Abbey, and I remember when I was in the final season, I said, hold on a second, I need to see what was set up in the pilot. And I went back and I watched the pilot again. And if any of you have watched it, I invite you to go back and watch the pilot because they introduce the entire cast of characters. Some characters are only on scene for 22 seconds, and the essence of them is demonstrated in that initial episode. And it is so brilliant that in a few lines of dialogue, you know Daisy's personality. You know what they're going to be for the entirety of the series, and that I just thought it was so brilliant that he had it all in his head, and he only needed a page to demonstrate it. So.
Chris, have myself.
Okay, good mind. I'll give you a list. The episode of 30-something in which Michael goes home to bury his father is like an Arthur Miller play and really incredible. It's what made me want to do television. Also,
Who wrote it?
Richard, oh my God.
I know.
I'm sorry, I was trying to think of this. Thank you. Thanks a lot. An episode of The Wonder Years called The Math Teacher, which was really gorgeous. The 6th episode of the first season of The Leftovers, which stars Carrie Coon, is almost entirely about her. It's one of the greatest episodes of anything I've ever seen. The pilot of My So-Called Life is incredible. And anything from Fleabag.
Yes.
Which
Have any
is
of you
on
seen
Amazon. If you've seen it,
good.
amazing television show. And I don't know about you. I mean, you talk about writing things. I love going back and reading reading the things that inspire me. I read them again and again, and it helps me write. It makes me think, well, this is worth doing. So you take something that it doesn't have to be a play. I reread The Sports Writer, Richard Ford, periodically, and it makes me think, oh, it's worth talking about what it's like to be alive. And as much as you can, and then I write television. So, but in any case, you do the best you can. Any other questions before we go?
But by the way, that's a glimpse. That would be a question that we would pose in the writers' room to procrastinate. So you just got a glimpse into what the writers' room might sound like.
Yeah.
I don't watch a lot of television, but I did just watch the reboot of Twin Peaks. Is David Lynch just seen as totally insane? How was he viewed in Washington?
Insane.
No, I mean, the reviews were mixed, but very positive, and I think that's approximately, in general, how TV writers see it. I have friends who are obsessed by it, and other friends who can't stand it.
I don't know. Does anyone know?
I don't see it.
Don't know. There's so much stuff out there right now. It's hard to keep track of what everyone's doing.
But if you don't watch a lot of TV, that's a weird place to start. That is literally the weirdest place you can start. That's not what TV is like in any possible way.
Can I?
Yeah. Any other questions?
Can I make?
Yeah. Yes.
Have you ever thought of writing television shows for kids or never?
I'm sorry.
Television shows for kids.
The kids.
Oh, by the way, that's its own area. So one doesn't normally cross over. Has anyone here worked in children's television?
No, but I have hopes because my kids cannot watch anything I write. So I really want to write something they can watch, but maybe one day.
There's a lot of great kids' TV now. Yeah.
Actually, I haven't successfully, but I do remember the very first thing that happened to me when I got to Los Angeles was I was friends, sort of, he'd hired me with Stan Lee, the Marvel guy. And he had just gone out to California. This was like a long time ago. He had just gone out, and Marvel was nothing in the movies. They were hoping to get a toehold, and I think they had a Saturday morning show of some, Saturday morning cartoon show. He asked me if I wanted to write one of those, and I couldn't at all. I was totally unable to do it. It's really pretty hard, I think.
But it's strange. The television business has got some silos in it. It's like all of us in drama, we don't interact very much with the people in comedy, and we don't. And children's television is also separate. It's made by different companies, often some really great ones, but we don't move back and forth all that easily from one thing to the other. Any other questions?
Can I say two quick things?
No,
I think
sure. Sorry.
Specifically for students who are here and want to transition into this, or people who support students doing this and are a part of the Harvard community, I think two things that Harvard could actually be better at if we wanted to promote people doing this. I think number one is if you're a student asking for help with career advising. I know as a student when I came into career advising, the only thing, I didn't even say I wanted to write. I was just I want to work in the industry. They gave me an email of someone who had graduated 10 years ago and was I think you can find them on the directory. She's a VP at Fox Searchlight or something. I think if you as students ask for that, if there's more, I've just seen Harvard Law School be very responsive to student demand. So asking for that, asking for more help, asking for more career advising and mentorship, I think you would get responses to. And I also think asking, if you can, for lip help, more people asking for that this be included under the umbrella of lip, that doing more
So what's that again?
low income payment protection. It basically like sort of helps you if you
No, I see.
don't
So
make
if
a lot of money with your
Yeah.
student loans. And that's something to consider if you want to transition, as you will come out of here with a lot of student loans. I mean, maybe you're lucky enough not to. I was not. But that is the thing that it is supposed to be there for. So I think if you have more student voices asking for, saying that this is something we want to pursue and something that we need help with, I think the administration would be responsive to that.
Is, when I was in law school, and this was the 60s, so it may not exist anymore, law school allowed you, I think in second and third year, to take one course each semester that was not in the law school. Is that still the
You can
case?
take more than that. You can take-
More than that?
Yeah, you can take more
That's
than
how
Well,
by the way, this was.
I wrote my first screenplay in creative writing A in Harvard College.
Right, and I took, in my third year, I took English YBR, which is playwriting with William Alfred, who's not alive, but it was amazing, so that's how I started, how I met my writing partner. So, right here. Thank you all for coming and spending time with us. We really appreciate it.